First, let's begin with a description of the apparatus. On top of the workbench, there's a cylindrical container containing water. Inside the container at the bottom is a rotating disc. This disc is connected to a shaft which is connected to an electrical motor located above the container. Note that there is a reflective sticker located on the rotating shaft directly below the motor. This allows the tachometer to measure its rotational speed. The motor is wired to a dial which regulates the rotational speed of the shaft. Next to the dial is a switch which is used to turn on or turn off the power to the motor. A panel containing 10 piezometers is located next to the cylindrical container. The taps of these piezometers are connected to the bottom of the disc at various distances from the center of the container. Now we will check that the apparatus is set up properly. Please make sure that the dial is set to 0. An orange light on the dial will indicate that the device is plugged to the wall. However, this does not imply that the dial is switched on or off. Therefore, it is necessary to ensure that the dial switch is turned on by pushing the switch downwards. Ensure that the piezometer levels are reasonably equal and approximately 45 cm high using the bottom of the cylindrical tank as a reference. If the piezometer levels are not reasonably equal or not high enough, please alert the teaching assistant. Going into the procedures of this experiment. First of all, take note of the initial levels in the piezometers using the sliding graduated scale. Please ensure that the order of the piezometers is also recorded. Afterwards, adjust the dial to the first dial setting as indicated in your lab manual and wait for some time in order to allow the piezometer levels to stabilize. Then, take note of the piezometer levels once they have stabilized. For this dial setting, determine the motor's rotational speed using the tachometer in the following manner. First, point the beam of light projected from the tachometer onto the reflective white sticker. Please note that the entire projection must be focused on the reflective white sticker. Also try to remain your hand still as any movement will not result in a stable reading on the tachometer. Now, repeat the previous measurements for the remaining dial setting as indicated in the lab manual. For the highest dial setting, make sure that the lowest piezometric level is not off the reading scale. If so, adjust the last dial setting such that the lowest piezometric reading still lies on the graduated sliding scale. Once all measurements for the remaining dial settings have been carried out, set the dial back to 0 and place the dial switch back in the upward position. Take note of the distances from the axis of rotation to the different piezometric tapping points. These distances can be found on the apparatus and can also be obtained from the lab manual. Finally, take note of the gear ratio which is indicated on the apparatus. This information can also be obtained from the lab manual. This concludes the procedures for this experiment. The following procedures are for the startup of the apparatus. If needed, add water in the cylindrical container such that the level of the water is 45 centimeters above the bottom of the cylindrical tank. First, make sure that the dial switch is off by placing it in the upward position, and then set the dial to 0. Afterwards, ensure that the power cord is plugged into the wall. An orange light will indicate that the power cord is plugged. Afterwards, remove any air bubbles from the piezometer by tapping gently on the piezometer tubes. Then, make sure that all the piezometer readings are approximately equal. If not, use the leveling screws located at each corner underneath the apparatus in order to level the cylindrical tank. Also make sure that there are no air bubbles trapped in the piezometer tubes directly under the sampling points. Now, place the dial switch in the downward position and check that the device is operational by increasing the dial setting and observing the pressure drop in the piezometers. The pressure drop should look like the following. Finally, set the dial back to 0 and place the dial switch back in the upward position. You are now ready to start the experiment with the students. The following procedures are for shutting down the apparatus. Make sure that the dial is set to 0 and then place the dial switch in the upward position. Unplug the power cord from the wall and stow it in a safe place. This concludes the procedure for shutting down the apparatus.